She had delivered quadruplets just 21 days earlier, and her body had not yet begun to heal from that ordeal. Every morning she rose before dawn to feed 4 newborns, moving through the quiet house on sheer exhaustion and faith. Then one ordinary Tuesday, she picked up a pregnancy test, certain it was just a precaution, nothing more. The first line appeared, then the second, and she stood completely still in the pale window light. She reached for a second test, then a third, and none of them told her anything different. 3 small plastic strips lay side by side on the washstand, each one carrying the same impossible answer in the same pale morning light. Her hands weren't shaking, which was somehow the most unsettling detail of all. She had survived something most women never face, and her body was already asking her to do it again. The 4 babies in the next room had no idea what their mother had just learned, and neither did her husband. Who was this woman, and how had her life arrived at this exact, unimaginable moment? 21 days ago, 4 separate heartbeats crossed the threshold of this world inside a single hour. There was no hospital, no epidural, no surgical team waiting behind a sterile curtain, just a midwife, a husband, and a woman who had decided to trust her body completely. The first baby came at dawn, and the last came as the morning light finally reached the kitchen floor. By the time it was over, she had lost enough blood that the midwife stayed through the night, watching and praying in equal measure. Her body had carried 4 lives to a point where all 4 could breathe on their own, and that alone is a kind of miracle most people will never fully understand. The recovery that followed wasn't quiet or gentle. It was relentless, because 4 newborns don't pause for a mother who is still healing. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since the birth. She hadn't eaten a full meal sitting down, and yet every morning she rose before the house did, because that is simply who she is. The question now is what this home actually looks like at 5 in the morning when the work begins again. She hasn't slept more than 90 minutes at a stretch in 21 days. 4 mouths wake on their own schedules, indifferent to each other. Indifferent to her. By the time the last one settles, the first is already stirring again, and the night becomes a loop with no exit. Her hands move through the dark by memory now. A latch here, a burp cloth there, a whispered sound that means nothing and everything. The window above the wash basin holds a faint gray light before the rest of the house wakes. She's already been awake for hours. Her body carried 4 lives to term, then surrendered them into the world in a single, staggering night, and it hasn't stopped working since. Before we continue, let me share something simple. There's a quiet peace that comes from knowing your home is prepared, not because you expect trouble, but because you value what you have. That's why I created the Amish Pantry Guide, to help you build a practical, well-stocked pantry with simple foods, time-tested storage wisdom, and less waste. If that kind of peace matters to you, you'll find the guide linked below. Principles have guided Amish families for generations. And now, let's get back to the story. Her body carried 4 lives to term, then surrendered them into the world in a single, staggering night, and it hasn't stopped working since. You can see it in the way she lowers herself into a chair, careful, deliberate, like someone who knows exactly where it hurts. The older children move quietly around her, as if they sense something fragile in the room. She folds a cloth, sets it down, picks up another, and the motion is so practiced it looks almost peaceful. Almost. What she doesn't know yet is that her body is already carrying a secret the morning light is about to reveal. She hadn't taken the test because she was worried. She'd taken it because her sister had asked her to. 3 weeks out from delivering 4 babies, her body was still a landscape of exhaustion, and pregnancy felt like the furthest thing from possible. The midwife had said nothing to concern her. The community had said nothing, and Ruth herself had said nothing to anyone about any lingering doubt. She simply tucked the small box under her arm one afternoon, the 4 babies asleep in their cradles for the first time all day, and walked to the back room. The window there faces the east field, and the light that afternoon was pale and clean, the kind that makes everything look honest. She unwrapped the test the way you unwrap something you already know the answer to, carefully but without any real suspense. She was certain this was a formality, a quiet confirmation of what her body had already told her. What she did not know was that her body had been keeping a secret of its own. Her hands were still trembling from the morning feeding when she picked the test up off the windowsill. The light came through the glass the way it always did, slow and pale, falling across the white plastic strip in her palm. And there it was, 2 lines, sharp and unmistakable, staring back at her like a verdict she hadn't asked for. She didn't move. She didn't call out to her husband or reach for one of the 4 sleeping shapes in the next room. Her body had carried and delivered 4 children just 3 weeks before, and it hadn't finished healing, not even close. The thought that formed wasn't words yet, it was something closer to a physical sensation, a cold drop through the center of her chest. Could the test be wrong? Could exhaustion or hormones still flooding her system produce a false result? She turned the strip toward the window and held it there, studying it the way you study something you desperately want to misread. The second line didn't waver. It didn't soften or blur in better light. It stayed exactly where it was, certain and dark and real. The first test had given her a door, a small, reasonable door marked defective or error or impossible. She'd walked toward it the way exhausted people walk toward anything that promises relief, and she'd reached for a second test with hands that were already shaking. The strip developed in the same slow, indifferent way, and the second second line came up just as dark, just as certain, just as unmistakable as the first. That door she'd been reaching for closed quietly without drama, the way the worst things always do. There's no language for what a woman holds in that moment. Not grief, not fear, not joy, not any single word that fits cleanly inside a human chest. Her body had delivered 4 children 3 weeks ago. 4 living, breathing, demanding human beings who needed her completely and without pause. And now the same body was telling her it had already begun again, already committed, already past the point of negotiation. She set the second test down beside the first, and the two of them sat there together like a verdict. What could a third test possibly add? And why couldn't she stop herself from reaching for it? The third test was never really a question. It was a verdict she was hoping to overturn. She laid all 3 tests side by side on the windowsill, where the morning light came in clean and cold and left nothing to interpret. 12 pale fingers arranged in a row, each one saying the same thing without apology or hesitation. She didn't cry, and that silence was somehow harder to watch than tears would have been. Her body had carried 4 lives just 3 weeks before, and it hadn't finished the sentence yet. What does a woman do when the thing she cannot hold becomes the thing she must hold again? She stood there long enough that one of the babies stirred in the next room, pulling her back into the present with a small, insistent sound. She covered the test with a folded cloth, the way you cover something you're not ready to explain. Her husband would come in from the fields before sundown, and she would have to find the words before he found the cloth. She didn't tell him with words. She simply set all 3 tests on the kitchen table and waited. Her husband stood there for a long moment, his hands still carrying the weight of the morning's work. There was no shouting, no collapse, no dramatic scene that the outside world might have expected from a man already stretched thin. In Amish life, a child is never a problem to be solved. It is a life to be received, and he received it. He pulled his chair out slowly, sat down beside her, and took her hand without saying anything at all. When the wider family learned, the response followed the same quiet current. Not denial, not panic, but a steady communal drawing in of breath. Neighbors who had already brought meals and helped with the 4 newborns simply added another layer of preparation to what they were already doing. Faith doesn't make the impossible easy. It makes the unbearable shared. And so the question that now hangs over this household isn't whether they will manage, it's what managing 5 children under 1 month old will actually cost her body. Her body hasn't finished healing from the last 4, and already something new is asking everything of her. 3 weeks postpartum, her muscles are still knitting themselves back together, her hormones still swinging through territory most women never visit. The quadruplets pulled on reserves she didn't know she had, and those reserves aren't restored yet. They're barely touched. What does it mean to carry a 5th child in a body that is still, in every measurable way, carrying the consequences of the last 4? She doesn't have a doctor standing beside her with a chart and a calm voice. She has 3 plastic tests on a wooden table and a silence that fills the whole room. The exhaustion she feels right now isn't just sleeplessness from 4 newborns, it's the weight of a question her body is asking before she's ready to answer it. You can see it in the way she holds those tests, turning them slowly as if a different angle might change what they say. Resilience for her won't look like strength on a poster or a story with a tidy ending. It will look like the next hour and then the one after that. It doesn't have the luxury of falling apart, and somehow that steadiness is the most astonishing thing about her. 3 weeks ago, her body delivered 4 lives into a world that runs on hand-stitched order and quiet endurance. Her hands still tremble when she lifts the smallest one, and now there is a 5th life already taking root beneath her ribs. You can call that fate, or you can call it something that has no name yet in any language. What the test confirmed isn't just a pregnancy, it's a reckoning with how much one person can be asked to carry. Her faith tells her that every child arrives with a purpose already written, but the woman holding those 3 white sticks knows that purpose and peace are not always the same thing. She will wake tomorrow and the day after and tend to what is in front of her. The community will bring food, offer hands, speak in measured tones about God's will, but in the quiet between feedings, she alone holds the full weight of what she now knows. Some stories don't resolve, and they simply continue, heavier and more luminous than before.